Then life groups started this last week. If you don't know what a life group's all about, we have some flyers on the back table that show you who the life group leaders are, when they meet and stuff. I would just highly encourage everyone to get involved in the life group. It's just a great time to get connected to people in the body in a more intimate way, and definitely give you greater opportunity to draw close to Jesus with other people. And then we got Bible studies coming up. Ladies' Bible study, Thursday ladies' Bible study starts this coming Thursday. I know you ladies are excited about that. The following Tuesday, on the 17th, is when the Tuesday night one starts. So if you want any more information on that, you could talk to my wife, Rebecca, who is not here right now. But she's always here during first service and in the in-between time. So if you came in the in-between time, you'd talk to her, or you could just call, or text, or email, or any of that. You guys are kind of mellow today, all right? I'm going to need a little more. There we go. All right, thank you. All right, tithe and offering boxes in the back, so stop by there. Also, if you're a new visitor and you have not yet filled out a new visitor card, I would invite you to grab one of these off the back table and fill them out. If you do fill them out and you give it to me, fill one out and give it to me today, you can get a limited edition Life Change Church coffee mug, because we're still trying to order some, so we don't have very many left. So this, I mean, literally, this could become a collector's item at some point. Anyways, I can hook you up. Okay. If you've been around Life Change Church at all, you know that most of the time when I teach, I usually have a series, like, 3-part, 4-part, 6-part, whatever, series on a topic, and then I go through it and teach that way. Last week, I just taught a message, and it wasn't part of a series. And so all week long, I was like, I need to start a series. And so I'm not starting a series, but it's not for lack of trying, because like all week long, like I said, I've been like, okay, what's the series? And last week, Rebecca mentioned something in passing. She was like, maybe you're not supposed to be in a series for a while, to which I said, that is preposterous, because I'm always in a series, and I don't change things, even though I'm the pastor of Life Change Church. So the whole week, I struggled to find a series, and then finally, God was like, hey, maybe you should listen to your wife since you're not listening to me. And then I said, I'm dumb, and then now we're here. So, not starting a series today. Just going to have another sermon that's not part of a series. And it might go that way for a while or not. I really have no idea what I'm doing. So there's that. All right. Got a question. Just show of hands. How many of you have either said this or heard someone else say the following? The question is asked, how are you? How's life? How's it going? And the answer that we sometimes say or hear is this: living the dream. Anybody ever hear that or say that? Right? Living the dream. Anyone else think as soon as they heard that, like as soon as it comes out, there's no way this was your dream? There's no way this was your dream. Like, even the way you said that is proof that you don't believe it. Like, you pretty much dreamed of doing anything else besides what you're doing right now. I was talking to a lady who used to work as a medical examiner, examining dead bodies. And she had a coworker, and he had been doing it for a long time. And the mortuary guy would ask him, how you doing? And he'd be like, living the dream. And I'm like, there's no way that was your dream. When you were a kid, you weren't like, you know what I want to do when I grow up? No. And if you did, then there's some disturbing things going on in your childhood, and we need to talk, right? So why would people say, I'm living the dream, if it's not actually true? And I've come up with some ideas, probably because it's easier than saying things like, well, I'm fine, even though I'm stuck in a job I don't like, or even though I don't make enough money to pay all the bills based on my own bad financial decisions, or I wish my relationships were better, or this bad thing is happening, or this bad thing just happened, or this bad thing is going to happen, and I wish I could do something else, and I feel trapped because changing seems so scary. So I can't, so I'm just going to go through life miserable, all the while telling people I'm living the dream. That sounds more like a nightmare to me. You know what I mean? And even if you can't relate to every part of that, you can relate to a lot of it at different times in your life if we're being honest. But what if living the dream meant you actually were living the dream? I mean, what if it actually was, right? Like, no matter what's going on in life, you lived in a way where you were focused on what God is doing and is going to do. And so you weren't so focused on what's going on right in front of you. And even though everything on this side of eternity might go wrong, you were living for something far greater than this. Living for something that is absolutely going to be perfect, regardless of what happens up to that point. See, when we start living like that, then we really can be at this place where every bad thing that happens, every hard thing that happens, every circumstance that's challenging that happens is just part of the dream. It's just part of the journey to get to where we're going. Like if we really lived believing that God had everything under control, what would change in your life if we really lived that way? For some, it might be everything. It might just completely turn you upside down, because all of our decisions will be based on the truth that God has already given us, rather than what's going on right in front of us. All of our decisions will be based on Him and not just a reaction to a circumstance that we were going through. So there's a guy in the Bible who did that. That's what we're going to talk about today, and I titled today's message, Livin the Dream. Open to Genesis chapter 37. And if you're looking at that and saying, oh, he forgot to put the chapter on there, because is that like Genesis chapter something, verses 37 through 45? No, that's Genesis chapters 37 through 45. That's a lot. Okay, we're not reading all that because you guys would be really mad at like 1 o'clock when you were still here. I'm not going to do that to you. So, because of that, I'm going to be skipping through it a lot, giving you Cliff Notes. You guys know what Cliff Notes? If you don't know what that is, Google it. All right, Cliff Notes are, back in the day, it was take a story and just give you like a synopsis of it. That's what I'm going to be doing, all right? Talking about a guy named Joseph. Joseph is like one of my favorite characters in the Bible. During first service, I said he was the legitest, but I don't think that's legit-est, but that's not a word. Anyways, his story starts in chapter 37. It goes through today. We're going to go through chapter 45. Again, not going to get it through it all, so I'd invite you guys to read that this week at some point, because I'm just going to give you bits and pieces. Now, we're not going to look at chapter 38 at all, because that's a whole different story about one of Joseph's brothers named Judah and some other stuff that happened, and you guys can check that out on your own. And then if you have questions, email Seth. All right, anyways, you can email me. And if you're reading through the Bible in a year, I know some of you guys like, oh, I'm going to read through the Bible in a year. You're going to get to this here really shortly anyway, so it's going to be totally fine. Joseph was the youngest son of Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons. He was the youngest at that time. Benjamin technically is the youngest, but we're not getting into that. Anyways, Joseph was the youngest son of Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons. Jacob was also later renamed Israel by God. So when it's talking about the tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, that's where this came from. Israel, Jacob, had 12 sons. These were the tribes of Israel and made up the nation of Israel. So Jacob is one of them. Joseph is one of them. Now, Jacob loved Joseph the most. Like there was he didn't make any bones about it. Like, parents, you try not to let anybody know who you love the most, but really there's one that you love the most, right? No, I'm just joking. You don't do that. You love your grandkids the most. When you have grandkids, and you tell your kids, like, I love them more than I love you, okay? That's just, it happens. You'll know. Anyways, Joseph is the youngest. This is also how that whole youngest kid syndrome started. Anybody the youngest? Let me see your hands. Okay, that makes a lot more sense to me. Yep, all right. I'm the youngest in my family as well, so. Jacob makes Joseph this beautiful coat. Joseph gets everything, right? And it's kind of sad, and the other brothers don't really like him, so there's that. Anyway, one day Joseph has a dream. This is where we start. Number one, if you're taking notes, you can write down the word passion, all right? Genesis chapter 37, we're going to start in verse 5. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. See, they already hated him, right? Then he tells them a dream. They hate him even more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose up and stood upright while your sheaves have gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father, as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I bow, and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Okay, Some people think Joseph made a mistake here. I've heard this before. Joseph shouldn't have told about his dreams. He shouldn't have been arrogant. But I don't think he was being arrogant, and I don't think he actually made a mistake, because I think he was being passionate about the fact that God had spoke to him. God spoke to him in a dream, and he was passionate about what God had spoken. And I don't think he was throwing it in their face. Because, like, when God speaks to you about something, who are you supposed to tell? You just go out and start talking to strangers about it, or do you tell the people close to you? You tell your family. You would tell the people that you're in, close relationship with, this is what God told me. This is what God told me. And you'd be excited about it, right? He was just telling the people who should have been excited for him that God spoke to him. But because of their own self-centeredness, they didn't respond very well, which I think kind of shocked Joseph, in all honesty. Father rebuked him. His brothers hated him even more. But Joseph had heard from God in a dream, and he now had purpose, and he had this passion, he had this vision for life, even if no one else can see it, and no one else would believe it, and no one else agreed with it. Even if those who were the closest to him, who were supposed to be the most supportive of him, were actually the opposite of that, it didn't matter, because he had this dream. Now, just so you know, it's kind of a spoiler alert, this actually happens, like later on in life. The brothers have to come down and bow down to him and stuff, and I'm just telling you that because that part of the dream, that's not actually the whole dream. See, the dream is not just that his brothers would bow down. The dream is his connection to God and following him wholeheartedly all the days of his life, which is what our dream should be too. See, when I say live in the dream, I'm talking about being a fully devoted follower of Jesus and following him all the days of your life, no matter what goes on in the meantime, okay? So just a little side note there. But about passion, let's tell you a quick story. We started Life Change Church. There was a small group of us who had like a dream. Now, none of us actually had a dream, and then we're like, oh, we should do that. It was just, we came together, we're like, hey, we're going to do this, and this is what I feel like God wants us to do. And then another couple's like, yeah, I'm on board with that. Another couple's like, yeah, I want to come. So it was like, cool, let's do it. And we wanted, the dream in and of itself was really to be a church for people who didn't like church. First of all, people who didn't know Jesus, because that's our goal, is that people would know Jesus. But then people who maybe went to church and was like, that's kind of boring, or went to church and was like, or maybe they've been hurt by the church, or they drift away from the church for whatever reason. We didn't actually have a dream, but that was the desire. That is still what the desire is, okay? That we would like to be that way. But at the beginning, when we had this, and when we started it, and we started telling people about this, there were people that opposed it, okay? Now, you might think, wow, there's probably like a group of atheists, right, that got together and were picketing my house and like doing all kinds of weird atheist stuff to try to get us to not start another church in Coos Bay, right? That's what you might think. That wasn't actually the case. People who had been close to us started talking bad about us and try to take us off course, try to tell us, oh, you shouldn't do that, you should do this instead. People from other churches started rumors about us and slandered us. There was an entire online thread talking about how bad we were to start a church, but then specifically how bad the leadership, like myself and Rebecca and Billy Michael and Seth and Joanna specifically, talked bad about us as well. All right? Guess what? None of that changed the dream, obviously, because we're here. None of that changed the passion for what God had called us to do, right? Because that's what God had called us to do. None of that took us off course from walking in what God wanted us to walk in. See, once God gives you direction and passion, that's the direction you go, okay? And when he calls you to himself, which he has, if we are followers of Christ and he has called you to himself, then your passion should be him and him alone. And you've been given a purpose. Now, you might not know specifics of the purpose. You might not know specifics of that, but you've been called as followers of Christ, as if you call yourself a Christian, which means like Christ, then you've been called to follow Jesus. If you've chosen to make him your Lord and Savior, that's the dream, to follow him all the days of your life. Now, will he give you specific other dreams and passions along the way? Absolutely, 100%. If you're determined to know his plan for your life. And if you don't have any specifics yet, if you're like, I don't really know what I'm doing, that's okay. That's okay. He'll line it out for you. Ask him, right? He'll begin to give them to you. But then we walk in them no matter what anybody else thinks, no matter if people even oppose you, even people close to you. You just walk in it, okay? All right, number 2, if you're taking notes, you write down the word prosperous. Still in Genesis 39, I'm going to get you caught up real quick. Jacob says, hey, Joseph, go check on your brothers because they're out taking care of the sheep. And Joseph goes, okay. So he goes to check on his brothers, right? The brothers see him coming, and they're like, I hate that dude so much, right? I mean, they're all talking. They're like, man, we hate him so much. Hey, I got an idea. They start talking amongst each other. Let's kill him. That's their idea. And so then one of them kind of feels bad, and he's like, no, let's just throw him in a pit because that's better, right? Because instead of killing him quickly, let's let him die in a pit. He actually was going to try to come rescue him later. But so they're like, okay, cool, whatever. Let's let him make him die slowly in a pit. So they throw him in a pit. And then they see some Midianite merchants coming by, like a caravan of merchants coming by. And they're like, ooh, I got an idea. These are slave merchants. Let's sell him to these guys. Because then we get rid of our brother and, right, we get some money out of the deal too. So that's a good idea, right? So they do that. Then they take his fancy coat that his dad made him. They dip it in blood. They tear it up. They take it back to his dad. And they're like, oh, wild animal got your son. Sorry. Have a nice life. So Jacob thinks he's dead. Joseph's sold into slavery. And he's specifically sold to a guy named Potiphar in Egypt, all right? So in chapter 39, we're going to read verses 1 through 6. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of the household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Listen again to verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. And he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. Prospered, right? Now, we look at that and we read that story, and it's like, okay, the brothers were going to kill him. They instead sold him into slavery. He got sold into slavery. He went to this guy Potiphar's house, and now he's in charge of Potiphar's house. Wow, that's such a great life, right? Joseph has it so good, right? Except he was sold into slavery. But he's the head slave, so that's awesome, right? Do you understand what's part of that title, head slave? Slave. It's still slave. He's still a slave. He was still, by definition, a person who is the property of and wholly subject to another and forced to provide unpaid labor. So there's that. Exactly how prosperous can a slave be? Do you think he got paid more than the other slaves since it's all unpaid positions? No, he probably had more responsibility, which means that if something bad happened, he's probably the one who was on the hook. It was probably actually a worse job than all the other slaves. Not only that, back then, slaves didn't have a 401k package or anything like that, so it wasn't like he was planning for retirement. Here's the deal. What we need to see here is that we have this set idea. When we say the word prosperity, it automatically means monetary value, material goods, stuff, money, those things. Now, is someone who has stuff and money prosperous? Absolutely, by the world standards. But we don't live by the world standards. We don't live by the world standards. We're not supposed to live by the world standards. See, when it says in Genesis 39 that Joseph was prosperous, it's not about how much stuff he had. It's about who he was in connection with, right? The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. That's why he was prosperous, because the Lord was with him. That was the prosperity. Not about his position or how much he had. It was about his relationship with God. It was about the fact that God was with him. Now listen, if we can get that into our heads, then it doesn't matter what we're doing or how much we have or how much stuff we have or how much money we make or any status we have or any symbol that we look like. The only thing that matters is that God's with us. And everything comes out of that. We're simply prosperous because we have connection to God. Now, am I saying everybody go sell all you have and become poor? No, that's not what this isn't about money. Because there are people who have no money that are prosperous. There are people who have a lot of money that are prosperous because the Lord's with them, not because of the money. Same thing. There are people who have no money and have a lot of money that are not prosperous either way because the Lord's not with them. It's all about your relationship with him. Material things are not indicative of prosperity. True prosperity is knowing that God is with you. True prosperity is having his vision alive in your heart. True prosperity is God's favor on your life. Joseph believed he was prosperous because he knew prosperity came from God, not man. And as he diligently diligently slaved away, God prospered him. God prospered him. See, I think if we could see ourselves in light of the way God sees us, we're already prosperous. We already have more than we could ask or imagine just in him, just in having relationship with God. It is greater than anything that you can gain on this world, right? Anything. So let's be those who stop worrying about how much we got, how much we don't got, anything like that. Let's be those who stay connected to the Lord. Let's be those who seek Jesus in all we do, because that's where prosperity comes from. All right, number 3, principle. Joseph is a man of principle. Principle is just another way of saying he's full of integrity or something like that, ethical. So Joseph is the head slave at this point. He's running the show at Potiphar's house, okay? Everything's going pretty smooth. Verse 6, the second part. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And you're like, why did they throw that in there? Well, you're going to see here in a second. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you were his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Okay, so Potiphar's wife thinks Joseph is a hottie, starts making some advances, okay? That's what's going on here. Joseph's like, no way. I'm not doing that. What's the reason why he's not doing that? Because she wasn't attractive? It does not say that, okay? Because he didn't want to lose his job? That's not it either. The only reason why he didn't want to do that is because he said, I'm not going to do this because it's sinning against the Lord. It didn't have anything to do with Potiphar. It didn't have anything to do with any of that stuff. See, when you become a person of principle, you do things based on what God would have you do, not based on what people think you should do, not based on what you think you should do, really. Because it's not about you getting caught or not getting caught. It's a simple question. Is what I'm doing wicked in the eyes of the Lord? Is what I'm about to do wicked in the eyes of the Lord? And if it is, then don't do it. If it is, then don't do it. That's it. Is what I'm about to do considered sin to God? Then don't do it. It's pretty easy, really. That's living with principle. Now, could Joseph have done it and not got caught? Probably. I mean, he probably could have. But he didn't even weigh that option because he knew that God would know. Right? And that was enough for him to make the decision that he did. Listen, as we live our lives on this earth, we're going to be inundated with possible compromises. Things that we could do to take the easy way, to take a shortcut, to do things that will benefit us, to do things easier. The enemy is great at placing them very strategically at just the right time where we have the biggest chance of giving in to them, these compromises. Listen, don't. Don't give in to the compromises. Don't give in. Even if you're 100% sure you won't get caught, because God will know. Do it for that. It's nothing else. Listen to what he says. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Put whatever compromise that's coming up in your life or whatever compromise you've been given into up to this point and think of it like that. How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And regardless, even if you think you're not going to get caught, you're probably going to get actually caught sooner or later too. You know why? Because it's not like when I was a kid, right? When I was a kid, you never got pictures of people doing dumb things. You know why? Because first of all, you had to have a camera. Secondly, if you took a picture, then you had to take 35 other pictures, right? Because you had a whole roll of film on there. Then you had to go to this place and have your film developed. And if you're lost at this point, you need to Google all this stuff, all right? Because this is actually the way things happen. Unless, of course, you were rich. Then you had a Polaroid, and that came right out. And you had it. You guys remember? He's shaking it like a Polaroid picture, right? And you might get a picture here and there, but like it was rolling the dice. You never really knew, right? Listen, now we have like entire platforms of social media that are dedicated to people doing dumb things and actually recording themselves. It doesn't even make sense to me, right? Anyway, in this day and age with all the cameras in the world, you probably get caught. So don't do it. But don't do it just because God doesn't want you to do it. That's the reasoning behind it. Listen, there's one sure way to not get caught when faced with a compromise. One way you will 100% never get caught. Don't do it. Don't compromise. You'll never get caught. Live by principle. If you wouldn't do it in front of people, maybe you shouldn't do it. How about this? I put this out there. Some of you overlook it, but if you wouldn't do it in front of me, maybe you shouldn't do it. If you wouldn't do it in front of Jesus, like if he was physically here, maybe you shouldn't do it. Billy Graham said it like this: integrity means that that if our private life was suddenly exposed, we'd have no reason to be embarrassed or ashamed. Because integrity means our outward life is consistent with our inward convictions. That's the thing. Your outward life is consistent with your inward convictions. That's the way we're called to live, with principle. All right, number 4, patient. Okay, the story continues. Potiphar's wife tries again with Joseph, gets him alone, starts, doing one of her Potiphar's wife thing. She doesn't even have a name. The Bible's like, I'm not even going to name this lady because she's so lame, right? It's just Potiphar's wife. You don't even get to have a name, lady, right? You guys, parents, you guys know about that? Oh, you're so-and-so's dad. You don't even have a name anymore, right, once you become a parent. Anyways, Potiphar's wife tries to get with Joseph. He's in there. He's like, no. And he takes off. He has a coat on. And she grabs his coat. And he just out the coat. Just takes off running. To which, like first service, I came to this realization I could have had a whole series just on Joseph's coats, because that's like second coat we're talking about, right? Anyways, I got to stop it. All right. He runs out of it to get away from her. She keeps it, right? Potiphar gets home, and she tells Potiphar, Joseph tried to rape me. This is chapter 39, starting in verse 19. When his master heard the story of his wife, that his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated me, he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Okay, so Joseph gets thrown into prison. So he's head slave, now he's a prisoner. We'll read on. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. And he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So he goes in there as a prison, and now he gets to be in charge of the whole prison. He's head prisoner, which, like head slave, still has some negative connotation to it, right? Because you're still in prison. Sometimes we talk about Joseph's story, we make it out to be this great thing that, he was head slave, then he was head prisoner. It's like he was still a slave and a prisoner. There's nothing good in this story going on. Anyway, in Genesis chapter 40, Joseph meets up with a cupbearer and a baker. They had offended the king. Okay, they were cupbearer. Cupbearer is just the guy that hands the cup to the king. I think they might even take a drink so they'll make sure that it's not poisoned or whatever, and then hands it to the king, which is not sanitary, but that's okay. Anyways. And then the baker to the king, right? They get thrown into prison. They had offended the king. They're thrown into prison and under Joseph's care. So they're in there for a while, and then one night, both of them had a dream. And the next day, they're all kind of like, thinking about it. And Joseph's like, what's up, guys? What's going on? Again, you should read this yourself because it's different than my interpretation. But, similar. Anyways, they're like, we had these dreams, but no one is here to interpret the dreams. And Joseph's like, well, tell me, because while I can't interpret them, the interpretations come from God. And we'll see what we can do. So they tell him, all right? Genesis chapter 40, starting at verse 9. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, in my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup in his hand. This is what it means, Joseph said to him. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head, and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness, mention me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, I had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. "This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh." Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so that at once again he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. All right, bummer for the baker, good for the cupbearer, right? Does anybody else see that? I know, it's sad, okay? Everybody be sad for a second, then get over it. All right. But the point being, Joseph said, hey, this is what the dreams mean. This is what's going to happen. But when that happens, remember that I'm down here. And remember that I'm not even supposed to be here. I don't deserve to be here. So maybe you could just remember me when you're restored to your position. That's what he says to the cupbearer, right? Let's read on. Verse 23, the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. And then I think like in that, I'm like, okay, so he forgot him, what, for a couple days, right? Maybe a week. Maybe it was a month. I mean, some stuff happened, and maybe he got sick, and then he was out for a while. It was the holidays. He didn't know what was going on, right? Chapter 41, verse 1. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. 2 full years. 2 years. Seriously? Think about this. The cupbearer did not think about Joseph one time in 2 years? Listen, every time that dude saw a grapevine, he should have remembered. Every time he handed the cup to Pharaoh, right? He should remember. How about every time he had a tasty baked good? Because his homeboy was dead, right? Nothing? 2 years. 2 years. And then Pharaoh has a dream. And the cupbearer says, oh, that's right. I forgot something. Listen to what he says. This kills me. Pharaoh talks about the dream. Verse 9. The chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. After 2 years. So next time, guys, you get in trouble with your wife, just be like, today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Totally work. That's not true. That's never going to work. All right. Think about Joseph here, though, and this is where the patience come in. Joseph has been waiting patiently, waiting for someone to come down and be like, hey, the cupbearer said you were legit, so you get to come out of prison. For 2 years, waking up every day, wondering, is today the day? Today the day he's going to remember me? 2 years he's down there, patiently waiting. There's no record that Joseph was bugging the guards like, hey, can you go check on the cupbearer for me? Did everything work out all right? Can I get out of here? He's just waiting. And if you really think about it, he's been waiting for a long time because he had the original dream for his own life a long time before that. He was 17 when he had that dream. At this point, he's probably 30-ish. So 13 years, just kind of waiting, right? Patiently. The cupbearer finally remembers him, or remembers his own shortcomings, right? Because he's super self-centered and only thinking about himself, obviously. Anyways, they call for Joseph, and Joseph goes before Pharaoh. Pharaoh's like, can you interpret this dream? Joseph's like, I can't do it, but God can. So Pharaoh tells him the dream. Joseph says, okay, here's the interpretation. There's going to be 7 years of abundance. Man, you guys are going to get so much crops and stuff. It's going to be crazy. 7 years of crazy abundance. But right after that, there's going to be 7 years of famine. And this famine is going to be so severe, you will not even remember the abundance that you had. It's going to be bad. And then Joseph's like, by the way, let me just give you some unsolicited advice. Here's what you should do. Look for someone who's super wise to run these things. Have them take 20% of the harvest during the abundant time because, listen, it's going to be so abundant, people will give 20% no problem because they're going to be bringing in crops hand over fist. It's going to be crazy. Store up all of that abundance in the storehouses, and then in the 7 years of famine, you'll have enough food for everybody, and you'll be able to sell some too. It'll be awesome. And Pharaoh's like, man, that sounds like a really wise and good plan. Anybody else got a better plan? And then all his wise people just stood there like, right? And so then Pharaoh's like, okay, Joseph, you're in charge. You're the man. You are now second in command to all of Egypt. Only with respect to the throne was Pharaoh greater than Joseph, is what the Bible says. All this because he was patient. He was not trying to run around and do everything to make his own dream come true. He was not running around scrambling to get everything to work out right so that his dream can come true. He was patient. And in his patience, he was just trying to stay focused on the Lord and his connection there. the Lord was with him. That's why he was prosperous. That's why he did all these things. But even in his patience, the Lord was with him, right? And listen, when you're like, it's easy to be patient when everything's going good, right? He wasn't patient in the lap of luxury. He was patient in suffering and in afflictions and in a pit and as a slave and as a prisoner and having to wait there for a really long time, waiting for his buddy to, come through. Because he knows the fulfillment of his dream is not dependent on how much skill he has to get it done. It's dependent on God. And so he just stays focused on him. Patient. That's where we need to live. All right, number 5, last one. Pardon. When I talk about pardoning, I mean forgiving. Forgiveness. I believe out of all the qualities of Joseph, this is the biggest. I believe out of all the qualities that we should have, this should be foremost, because this is the way Jesus lived. Forgiveness, right? Everything happens according to what Joseph said. There's 7 years of plenty. They take 20% of everything, they store it in the storehouse, then the famine starts. Now, Egypt obviously is dealing with the famine, but it's widespread. So in Canaan, there's also a famine. That's where Joseph's family lives, right? They're dealing with the famine. They hear there's food in Egypt, so they go to buy it. So Joseph's brothers come in, and guess who's in charge of distributing food and selling it? Joseph. And he's standing there, and his brothers come in and bow down. And Joseph recognizes him. He's like, these are my brothers. And his brothers don't recognize him because at this point it's been 20 plus years since they've seen each other, right? Now again, there's a lot of stuff going on in there, so you should read the whole thing. But here's the deal. Here's the point. Joseph forgave them. Joseph forgave them. Now think about this. He's been over 20 years removed from his family and went through not a good time. Not a good time. But he forgave them. And it's crazy, really, too. And you might think, this forgiveness thing, it's way bigger than just his brothers. Because if it was just his brothers, you guys would be like, well, it's his family, you got to forgive them. To which I say, no, you don't. Anyways, I'm just joking, you got to forgive everybody. But some people think, well, it's family, so you have to forgive them. But he didn't just forgive his brothers, right? So when you're second in charge of all Egypt, you think you got some pull and other stuff? The answer is yes. You have some pull and other stuff. So listen, if I'm Joseph and I get made second in charge of Egypt, and Pharaoh's like, hey, Joseph Dale is now second in charge of Egypt. Okay? You know what first thing I'm doing? I need to talk to 3 people real quick. Potiphar, his wife, and the cupbearer need to come up in here because we got some talking to do. Because there's some shortcomings that we need to discuss. You know what I'm saying? But he forgives them. He forgives Potiphar. He forgives his wife. Forgives the cupbearer, right? He could have thrown those guys in a prison or had them executed, whatever he wanted to. But there's no retaliation. He forgave his brothers. And because of his connection to the Lord, because of his vision, his dream, and his desire to follow God, he also realizes that everything that's happened and everything that's gone on and where they're at right now is because God did that. Listen to this. This is over in chapter 45, verses 1 through 8. Joseph could no longer control himself. He's with his brothers. Before all his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Makes sense. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing or reaping, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. 3 times, Joseph reiterates that everything happened because God did that. He says, you didn't send me here. You didn't throw me in a pit. God did that. You didn't sell me into slavery. God did that. You didn't put me in prison. God did that. He was able to forgive because he realized that everything that happened to him was under God's control. It's completely under God's control. That God did the things to get him to where he was at to fulfill the purpose that he had for his life. so they could save his family, right? You know, the ones that hated him, so he could save them. All because Joseph understood that God did that. He was able to do it. He was able to forgive. Now, how much easier would it be for us to pardon people, to forgive people, right? If we thought of it this way. We're here right now. You are in this place right now because God did that. Whatever hard thing that's going on in your life, you know what? It's not a surprise to God. And you might not like it, and you might not agree with it, and you might even get mad at God sometimes for where he puts you, but you're there for a reason. And if our eyes are fixed on the dream, if our eyes are fixed on the goal of being truly devoted followers of Jesus, then whatever we're dealing with right now, that's just part of that journey. And some parts of the journey suck, okay? Some parts of the journey are hard, and they're not fun, and they make you emotional and things like that. But it's all part of the journey, right? The psalmist says, even though I walk through the darkest valleys, I will fear no evil. You know why? Because there's dark valleys we got to walk through. There's things that we're going to go through. But if we can look at it and say, you know what? I'm going through the valley. I'm not hanging out in the valley. I'm going to the other side because that's where God is. And then we're moving that way. See, the thing is Joseph didn't have this, but we have this. We have the example of Jesus who did this perfectly, right? While we were still his enemies, Christ died for us. He died for people that were killing. He forgave people, right? What did he say? Forgive them, Father. They don't know what they're doing. While he's hanging on a cross, while he's getting beaten, while he's getting mocked, he's forgiving these people. But then things happen in our lives that are less than great, and we blame it on this person or that person, and we think we have some authority to not forgive. All the while, greedily grasping at the pardon that we have received from Jesus, even though we are no better than those people. Listen, we're at where we are right now because God did that. And if you've been holding things over people, let it go. Let that go, right? Sorry. Like a granddaughter, so Frozen song just got stuck in my head real quick. I got rid of it. Let it go. I let it go. All right. Pardon all those people that you've been holding that stuff over. Don't keep holding on to it. Because when you actually get to that place and you're just walking forward and that stuff is not weighing you down, I think that's when we're actually living the dream. See, today we have the opportunity to change the way we think about stuff and the way we think about others and the way we think about God and his plan for our lives. But listen, when I talk about living the dream, it doesn't mean that everything's going to go right for you now, that everything's going to run smooth, everything's going to be great, right? Jesus tells us, in this world we will have troubles. But then he says, take heart, because he's overcome the world, right? Take heart, stay connected to him, because then we get to overcome the world. We don't have to let it get us down. Living the dream is not about accomplishing something that you think is great down the future. It's about staying connected to God. That's the dream. Everything should be born out of that. That's what Joseph did. He was completely focused on God. That's where we're supposed to be. Let's be people who do that. Let's pray. God, you're good to us. Thanks for today. Thank you for your word. Thank you for your love. Thank you that you continue to call us out to a place where we can just remain 100% focused on you, connected to you. God, we know that we are going to walk through some hard times. There might be people in this room right now that are in the midst of those times. God, I pray that you would give them in their heart right now the hope to know that you have everything under control, that wherever they're at and whatever they're going through is not a surprise to you. It didn't take you off guard. And while they may not agree with why they have to be there, they're there. I pray that they would know that it's part of the journey and they would walk with you through whatever it is. And God, for those of us who are maybe not going through anything right now, maybe we actually feel like, hey, I'm actually living the dream right now. Lord, I pray that perspective would be because of our relationship with you and not because of the circumstances we're in, because every day we know better than most that circumstances change. So I pray our hearts, our minds would be fixed on you and that we would follow you wholeheartedly, God, and be able to say, this is living the dream, following Jesus. Everything that happens in the midst of that is just part of the journey on the way there. God, thanks for today. Thanks for each person here. I pray that you would bless them as they go about their day, Lord, and I pray that we would fall more in love with you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, have an awesome day. Be blessed.